Cristiano Ronaldo never expected to see a boy walking up to him at the lavish gala, let alone that the young man was his son, the child he had kept hidden from the world for years. The beginning of Lucas's story was cloaked in secrecy, a secret so profound that it was meant to stay buried forever. His mother, Sophia, was a young woman of modest means and extraordinary resilience, living in a small coastal town in Madeira, Portugal. Her life had been simple yet grueling. She worked long hours at a bustling restaurant by the harbor, balancing plates of grilled fish and fragrant bowls of caldo verde while enduring the endless demands of tourists who came to marvel at the island's beauty. Sophia's laughter used to echo across the narrow streets, a sound that made even the hardest days feel lighter. But everything changed one fateful evening when Cristiano Ronaldo, Madeira's golden son, returned to his hometown for a brief vacation. The town buzzed with excitement as rumors of his arrival spread like wildfire. His fame had already reached astronomical heights, and he was the pride of Madeira, a symbol of what anyone from their humble town could achieve. It was during one of those warm summer nights, under a hazy twilight sky, that Sophia first met him. The restaurant was unusually crowded, the air thick with the aroma of garlic and charred lemon. Sophia had been rushing from table to table when she spotted him sitting in a quiet corner, his broad shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to shield himself from prying eyes. He wasn't alone, a few friends surrounded him, their laughter blending into the low hum of conversation. "Excuse me," Sophia had said nervously, clutching her notepad as she approached his table. His presence was overwhelming, his fame, his aura. But it wasn't just his status that struck her. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers with a fleeting curiosity, a moment that felt electric in its simplicity. As the night unfolded, Cristiano struck up a conversation with Sophia, something she hadn't expected. He wasn't what she imagined, a larger-than-life persona untouchable by ordinary people. Instead, he was charming, even kind, in a way that made her feel seen. When her shift ended, he invited her to join him and his friends for a drink. Against her better judgment, she accepted. One night turned into two, and before Sophia knew it, she found herself swept into a whirlwind romance that felt like a dream she couldn't quite hold on to. But dreams, as Sophia would soon learn, are fleeting. Months later, after Cristiano had returned to his life of football stardom, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. The realization was both joyous and terrifying. She didn't want anything from him, not his money, not his fame, just acknowledgement that her child had a father. With trembling hands, she wrote a letter explaining everything. Days passed, then weeks, until she finally received a response, not from Cristiano, but from his legal team. The letter was cold and transactional. A DNA test would be arranged, they stated, and should the child prove to be Cristiano's, a financial arrangement could be made, on one condition: Sophia was to remain silent. The child would never bear his name, and Cristiano's involvement would be limited to monetary support. Sophia's heart shattered as she read the words. She refused. She didn't want her son to grow up feeling like a secret, a shameful mistake. Her refusal unleashed a storm. The media caught wind of the story, twisting it into cruel headlines that painted Sophia as a gold digger, a liar trying to trap a global icon. Cristiano remained silent, his team denying everything. As the months passed, Sophia found herself ostracized by her community. People whispered behind her back, their pity-laced glances cutting deeper than outright insults. Pregnant and alone, she decided to leave Madeira, escaping to Lisbon in search of anonymity. Lucas was born on a rainy winter night in a cramped hospital room. The cries of newborns echoed down the sterile corridors, but none felt as poignant as his first wail. Sophia held him close, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "You are not a mistake. You are my miracle." For the first few years of Lucas's life, Sophia tried her best to shield him from the truth. But the weight of rejection cast a long shadow over their lives. They lived modestly, Sophia working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Despite her efforts, Lucas couldn't escape the whispers. Neighbors speculated about his father, some even cruelly suggesting that Sophia had lied about Ronaldo to gain sympathy. As Lucas grew older, he began asking questions. "Where's my dad?" he would ask, his big brown eyes searching hers for answers. Sophia would evade the question, her voice breaking as she told him that his father loved him in his own way. By the time Lucas turned 10, he began to piece together the truth. At school, he overheard other kids mocking him, calling him the discarded Ronaldo. The words stung, carving wounds into his young heart that he didn't yet know how to heal. Why didn't he want me? Lucas asked one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia froze, her hands trembling as she set down the plate she had been drying. She knelt before him, clutching his small hands in hers. "It's not about you," she said, her voice breaking. "It was never about you. You are more than enough, Lucas. You are everything." But Sophia's words couldn't mend the cracks forming in Lucas's soul. He grew up feeling like a ghost, present but invisible, a shadow of someone who was supposed to matter. Each time he saw Cristiano Ronaldo on television, holding his other children or celebrating victories, the ache in Lucas's chest deepened. Why them and not me, he would think, the question echoing endlessly in his mind. By the time Lucas reached adolescence, the pain had hardened into resentment. He became withdrawn, his once bright spirit dimmed by years of rejection and ridicule. Sophia watched helplessly as the boy she loved more than life itself began to slip away. One evening, after yet another argument about his father, Lucas stormed out of their tiny apartment. He wandered the city streets for hours, tears streaming down his face as anger and sadness consumed him. At that moment, he vowed that he would never beg for love or validation, not from Ronaldo, not from anyone. What Lucas didn't realize, however, was that the path ahead would be even darker before he could find the light. The whispers never stopped. They followed Lucas like shadows, lurking in the corners of every classroom, every street, every moment of silence. He didn't have to hear the words to know what people were saying, the child Cristiano Ronaldo didn't want. Kids at school weren't subtle. They would wait until Lucas passed by to hiss insults just loud enough for him to hear. Maybe he's not really Ronaldo's son. Look at his shoes, Ronaldo wouldn't let his kid walk around in those. Maybe he's a fake. His mom probably made the whole thing up. The words stuck to Lucas like thorns, pricking at him until the wounds bled. No matter how much his mother reassured him, telling him he was special, loved, and valuable, those whispers became his truth. Deep down, Lucas began to believe that he wasn't enough, not for his father, not for anyone. The rejection became more pronounced as he grew older. His teachers would shoot him sympathetic looks whenever Ronaldo's name came up in casual conversation. Whenever there was a televised football match, and Ronaldo scored a stunning goal, Lucas's classmates would glance at him as though waiting for him to react. It felt like his father's shadow loomed over him even in the most mundane moments of his life. At home, the atmosphere wasn't much better. Sophia, exhausted from working double shifts as a housekeeper, tried her best to make Lucas feel like he had everything he needed. But no amount of her love could fill the void left by Ronaldo's absence. Sophia herself bore the weight of humiliation and betrayal. She had given up so much to keep Lucas safe, to protect him from being a pawn in Ronaldo's carefully curated public image. Yet it seemed like the world still punished her for daring to keep her son. When Lucas turned 12, things took a turn for the worse. His school arranged a charity football tournament, and Lucas, who had always admired the game from afar, reluctantly joined one of the teams. For a brief moment, it felt like he had found something that gave him purpose. He wasn't the fastest, but his agility and determination made him a solid player. But the joy was short-lived. During one match, a teammate sneered, "You think you're good because your dad's Cristiano Ronaldo? Guess what, he doesn't even care if you exist." The words hit harder than any tackle could. Lucas froze, his face burning with shame. The boy laughed, and the game continued as if nothing had happened, but for Lucas, everything had changed. That night, he sat in his tiny bedroom, staring at the poster of Ronaldo on the wall. It wasn't there because he admired the man, it was a reminder of the father he would never have. By his teenage years, the weight of rejection had hardened into anger. Lucas withdrew from everyone, including Sophia. Their once close bond was now strained, their conversations reduced to bitter arguments about his future. "Lucas, please don't skip school again," Sophia begged one evening as she leaned against the kitchen counter, her face lined with exhaustion. "Why? So I can sit there and listen to them call me a bastard? So I can watch them laugh at me?" Lucas shot back, his voice sharp with bitterness. Sophia flinched but didn't respond immediately. She walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're better than this, me Filio. Don't let their words define you." Lucas shrugged her hand off and muttered, "Their words don't hurt as much as his silence." From that moment on, Lucas stopped pretending to care about anything. He barely passed his classes, skipped meals, and spent hours wandering the city streets alone. He hung out with boys who were just as lost as he was, boys who introduced him to the temporary escape of cigarettes and cheap alcohol. It wasn't long before his reckless behavior caught up to him. One evening, Lucas and his friends decided to steal a motorbike for a joyride. Speeding through the empty streets of Lisbon, Lucas felt an exhilarating sense of freedom. For a moment, it was as if nothing mattered, not his father's rejection, not the whispers, not the pain. But that freedom came to an abrupt end when the bike skidded on wet pavement, sending Lucas flying. He woke up in a hospital bed, his body battered but alive. Sophia sat by his bedside, her eyes red from crying. "What were you thinking?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Lucas turned away, staring at the sterile white walls. "I wasn't." That night, Sophia made a desperate plea. "Lucas, I know you're angry. I know you're hurt. But this path you're on, it's not the way. You're better than this. You are worth so much more than you think." Lucas wanted to believe her, but the weight of rejection was a heavy burden to carry. Every day felt like a reminder of what he didn't have, a father who cared, a life free of judgment, a chance to feel normal. Despite Sophia's efforts to steer him back on track, Lucas's anger continued to consume him. He couldn't look at a football match without feeling a surge of resentment. He couldn't walk down the street without hearing Ronaldo's name and feeling like an afterthought. But the anger, as destructive as it was, eventually began to exhaust him. There were nights when Lucas would sit on the rooftop of their apartment building, staring at the stars and wondering if there was more to life than this pain. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that there had to be something better, a life where he wasn't defined by someone else's choices. That voice was faint, but it was enough to keep him going. Enough to spark the faintest flicker of hope. By the time Lucas turned 14, the bitterness in his heart had grown into a storm. He was still so young, but the weight of his father's absence and the relentless gossip that followed him had crushed his spirit. He often wondered if his life was destined to remain this way, stuck in the shadow of someone who didn't even care about him. It was a cold winter evening when Lucas hit his lowest point. The Lisbon streets were wet from the rain, the dim streetlights reflecting off puddles as he walked aimlessly through the city. His hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his breath fogging in the chilly air. He had just come from a disastrous meeting with his school principal, where his poor grades and skipping classes were addressed. "I want to help you, Lucas," the principal had said. "But you need to let me. You can't keep shutting everyone out." Lucas hadn't answered. He'd simply stared out the window, avoiding the principal's gaze. What was the point? No one could change how people saw him. He was the boy Cristiano Ronaldo didn't want, and that would always define him. That night, Lucas found himself at a dingy park, sitting on a rusted bench as the cold bit at his skin. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, but it did little to keep him warm. In his hand was a pack of cigarettes he'd stolen from one of his older friends. He didn't even want to smoke, he just wanted to feel in control of something, anything. What's the point of any of this? Lucas muttered to himself, staring at the gray sky. He thought about all the times he had imagined meeting Ronaldo, about the things he would say to him. "Do you even know what you left behind?" he whispered to no one, his voice trembling. The bitterness only grew as Lucas fell deeper into self-destructive habits. He started skipping school more frequently, ignoring Sophia's pleas to come home on time. He spent his afternoons with the wrong crowd, older boys who didn't care about his past or his pain. They only cared about the thrill of breaking rules and living recklessly. For Lucas, it was a way to escape. One evening, Lucas and his friends gathered in an abandoned parking lot, passing around a stolen bottle of whiskey. The air smelled of damp concrete and cigarette smoke, and the only light came from the faint glow of a flickering street lamp. "What's your deal, man?" one of the older boys asked Lucas, his words slurring slightly. "You're always so angry." Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he took another swig from the bottle, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction from the ache in his chest. "He's Ronaldo's kid," another boy said, laughing. "The one he doesn't want. Can you imagine? Your dad's, like, a billionaire, and you're here with us losers." The group burst into laughter, but Lucas didn't join in. His hands trembled as he clenched the bottle, his vision blurring with rage. "I don't care about him," Lucas muttered, though the crack in his voice betrayed his words. "Yeah, sure," the boy replied, smirking. "That's why you're still mad, huh?" The laughter grew louder, echoing in Lucas's ears until it became unbearable. He stood abruptly, throwing the bottle against the wall. It shattered into 100 pieces, the sound silencing the group. "Shut up!" Lucas shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "You don't know anything about me." The group stared at him, stunned. Lucas turned and stormed off, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't stop walking until he reached a bridge overlooking the city. The lights of Lisbon stretched out before him, beautiful and indifferent. For the first time in a long time, Lucas let himself cry. He cried for the father who had abandoned him, for the childhood he had lost, for the person he could have been if things had been different. The tears came in waves, each one washing away a bit of the anger he had been holding onto for so long. As the sun began to rise, Lucas made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a cycle of anger and pain. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he had to change. Not for Ronaldo, not for the people who judged him, but for himself. Lucas began taking small steps toward rebuilding his life. He cut ties with his toxic friends, started attending therapy sessions, and found comfort in spending more time with Sophia. He even started writing as an outlet, filling notebooks with his thoughts and emotions. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him a sense of purpose. For the first time, he felt like he was in control of his own story. Sophia noticed the change in him almost immediately. She watched as the anger that had once consumed her son began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. "I'm proud of you, Lucas," she told him one evening as they sat at the dinner table. Lucas looked up from his plate, surprised. "For what?" "For choosing to be better," Sophia said, her voice filled with emotion. "It's not an easy thing to do." Lucas didn't respond, but her words stayed with him. Months turned into a year, and Lucas continued to grow. He discovered a love for storytelling, pouring his pain and experiences into creative writing that helped him process his emotions. His work began gaining attention online, with readers praising his raw and honest voice. But even as Lucas built a new life for himself, the shadow of his father lingered. He couldn't escape the whispers, the questions, the looks. And deep down, a part of him still yearned for closure, for an answer to the question that had haunted him for so long: why wasn't I enough? By the time Lucas turned 15, his life had started to stabilize. The chaos that once defined his days now felt like a distant memory. Therapy sessions had helped him untangle the pain and anger he had carried for so long. Writing had become his refuge, a way to release the emotions that words couldn't express in conversation. He was still young, but the small victories he achieved, improving his grades, reconnecting with Sophia, staying out of trouble, felt monumental. Still, there were moments when the void left by his father gnawed at him. Lucas knew better than to dwell on it, but the questions were always there, lurking in the corners of his mind. Why didn't he want me? What did I do wrong? One evening, while Lucas was sitting in his small room typing on an old laptop Sophia had saved up to buy, she knocked gently on the door. "Lucas, there's something you should see," she said, her voice hesitant. Lucas turned in his chair, frowning. What is it? Sophia handed him an invitation, the envelope thick and elegant, with gold lettering etched into the surface. Lucas's stomach tightened as he read the words. Exclusive charity gala, an evening with Cristiano Ronaldo and guests. He looked up at Sophia, his brow furrowed. What is this? Why would I be invited to something like this? Sophia hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. I don't know, meu filho. It came in the mail today. No return address, no explanation. Just your name. Lucas stared at the invitation, a storm of emotions brewing inside him. Anger, confusion, hope, they all collided, leaving him breathless. After years of silence, why would his father suddenly want him there? Maybe it's a mistake, Lucas muttered, tossing the envelope onto his desk. But Sophia shook her head. It's not a mistake, Lucas. Someone wanted you to have this. And, maybe you should go. Lucas shot her a disbelieving look. You think I should just show up and pretend everything's fine? After all this time? Sophia sighed, sitting on the edge of his bed. No, I don't think you should pretend. But I do think you deserve answers. And maybe this is your chance to get them. Lucas didn't respond, but her words stayed with him. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling and gripping the invitation tightly in his hand. The evening of the gala arrived quicker than Lucas expected. Sophia helped him borrow a suit from a neighbor, and though it was slightly too big, it made him look older and more confident than he felt. Remember, Lucas, Sophia said as she adjusted his tie, you don't owe him anything. Just be yourself. Lucas nodded, his stomach churning with nerves. As he walked out the door, Sophia called after him, I'm proud of you. The gala was being held at one of Lisbon's most luxurious hotels, a towering building that glittered in the evening light. Lucas stepped out of the taxi and stared up at the massive structure, feeling out of place before he even entered. The red carpet stretched out before him, lined with photographers and reporters eager to capture the arrival of celebrities. Lucas took a deep breath and stepped onto the carpet, his heart pounding in his chest. The flashes of cameras blinded him, and he heard whispers ripple through the crowd as people noticed him. Is that? No, it can't be. Wait, isn't he? Lucas kept walking, his head held high even as anxiety clawed at him. Inside, the hotel ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the room. The air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved gracefully through the crowd, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Lucas scanned the room, searching for the man who had haunted his thoughts for so long. And then, he saw him. Cristiano Ronaldo stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a crowd of admirers. He looked exactly as Lucas had seen him on television, confident, charismatic, larger than life. But seeing him in person made Lucas's chest tighten. For a moment, Lucas froze. The urge to turn around and leave was overwhelming. But then he remembered Sophia's words, you don't owe him anything. Just be yourself. Gathering his courage, Lucas stepped further into the room. He avoided Ronaldo for now, instead observing the people around him. Celebrities, politicians, and business moguls mingled effortlessly, their laughter echoing through the grand space. Lucas felt out of place, but he reminded himself why he was there. As he moved through the crowd, a waiter approached him with a tray of drinks. Lucas hesitated before taking a glass of sparkling water, his hands trembling slightly. You're doing fine, he whispered to himself, trying to steady his nerves. Just then, a voice behind him made him stop in his tracks. Lucas? He turned slowly, and his eyes met Ronaldo's. The room seemed to go silent, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Ronaldo's expression was unreadable. Was it shock? Curiosity? Regret? Who invited you here? Ronaldo asked, his voice calm but tinged with surprise. Lucas stared at him, his heart pounding. This was the moment he had imagined countless times, the moment he had prepared for in his mind. But now that it was here, he didn't know what to say. I got an invitation, Lucas replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. I thought maybe it was from you. Ronaldo raised an eyebrow. It wasn't. The words hit Lucas like a blow, but he refused to let it show. Then I guess someone wanted us to talk, Lucas said, meeting Ronaldo's gaze head-on. Ronaldo's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Lucas thought he might walk away. But then Ronaldo sighed and gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. Let's talk, he said, his tone neutral. Lucas followed him, his mind racing. As they sat down at a small table, Lucas braced himself for whatever was about to come next. The silence between Lucas and Cristiano was thick, almost suffocating. As they sat across from each other in the dimly lit corner of the ballroom, the chatter of the gala seemed far away, like a distant echo. It was just the two of them now, the moment Lucas had thought about for years, the moment when he could finally demand answers. Cristiano leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning Lucas carefully, but there was something unreadable in his expression. Lucas, for his part, could feel his heart hammering in his chest, the rush of emotions threatening to spill over. He wanted to yell, to demand everything, answers, recognition, even an apology. But instead, he swallowed hard and took a deep breath. I'm here because I got an invitation, Lucas said, his voice surprisingly calm despite the storm of feelings inside him. And I thought maybe it was from you. Cristiano's lips tightened into a thin line, his gaze not leaving Lucas for a moment. It wasn't, he replied, his tone cool and distant, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Someone else must have sent it. Lucas's chest tightened. There it was, the confirmation that his father hadn't been the one to reach out to him. It stung more than he had expected, but he quickly masked it with a hard look, refusing to let Ronaldo see how deeply it affected him. So, you're telling me that you've never thought about me? Never once wondered where I was? What I was going through? Lucas's voice broke slightly, but he fought to keep his composure. Because I've spent every single day of my life wondering why you never wanted me. Wondering why I was left behind. Cristiano's face remained stoic, but his eyes flickered with something, guilt, perhaps, or maybe regret. He didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, the tension in the air felt almost unbearable. You have no idea what I've been through, Lucas, Cristiano finally said, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were speaking to himself. It wasn't an easy decision to make. Lucas's brows furrowed. Decision? What decision? He demanded. You just disappeared. 4 years. How is that a decision? Cristiano shifted in his seat, avoiding Lucas's gaze for a brief moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tinged with a sense of sadness that Lucas hadn't expected. I never wanted to hurt you, Ronaldo said softly. But there were circumstances, things that I couldn't control. Things that were beyond me. You have to understand that. Lucas clenched his fists, the anger bubbling up again. What circumstances? What could possibly be more important than me? Your own son? He could feel his voice rising now, the years of abandonment, the years of pain coming to the surface all at once. You're a superstar, a billionaire. You could have moved heaven and earth for me, and yet you chose to leave me to suffer. Cristiano's face twitched, his eyes hardening slightly. It's not as simple as that, he snapped, but Lucas wasn't finished. No, it is simple. Lucas shot back, the years of confusion and rejection coming to a head. You chose your fame, your career, your perfect life over me. Over the son you didn't even bother to acknowledge. Cristiano took a deep breath, his gaze steady now. The truth is, I never wanted to hide you from the world. I never wanted to keep you in the shadows. But there were things, situations, that I wasn't prepared to face, and I made decisions that I regret. Lucas's confusion deepened, but he stayed silent, waiting for the explanation that would finally make sense of it all. There's someone who's been involved in all of this, Cristiano continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone who has known about you. Someone close to me. They've been keeping you hidden. Lucas felt his stomach churn. Hidden? He was the hidden one? What did that even mean? Cristiano's eyes shifted to the side, not meeting Lucas's gaze. Your mother. She made the decision to keep you away from the press. To keep you out of the spotlight. But I agreed. We both agreed. I wasn't ready for it. I thought it was better this way. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. His mother? It was all beginning to make sense. The secrecy, the unknowns. But there was one question that burned in his mind now, one question that would change everything. Who made the decision for me to be hidden? Who decided I had to live in silence, in the dark, without the chance to know the truth about my own life? Cristiano looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and resignation. It wasn't just me, he said. It was your mother's idea, but it was someone else too. Someone who had a lot of influence over my life. Lucas felt his pulse quicken, his mind racing. He had already been abandoned by his father, but now it seemed like there was more, someone else pulling strings, controlling the narrative, keeping him in the shadows. He wasn't just a forgotten son. He was a pawn in a game he hadn't known he was part of. Who? Lucas demanded, his voice shaking with disbelief. Who else was involved? Who else had the power to make decisions about my life? Cristiano's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then, with a final, deep breath, he said the words that would forever change the course of Lucas's understanding of everything. It was my agent. He was the one who kept the secret. He was the one who made sure the world didn't know about you. The idea was that it would hurt my brand, my career, if people knew I had a son I wasn't involved with. He convinced me that it was better for everyone if you stayed out of the spotlight. Lucas felt like the ground beneath him had completely shifted. His eyes blurred with unshed tears, his mind reeling from the weight of the truth. So you let him control me? You let someone else decide my fate? Lucas's voice cracked, the hurt palpable in every word. He felt betrayed on a deeper level than he ever thought possible. Cristiano's face was pale now, and the remorse in his eyes was undeniable. I was wrong. I let him manipulate me, and I let you pay the price for it. But Lucas was already moving, standing up and walking away from the table. He couldn't stay in this moment anymore. His heart was heavy, but it wasn't just the weight of betrayal, it was the weight of knowing the truth. Knowing that he had been hidden, treated as if he was nothing, all for the sake of someone else's image. As Lucas walked away, the music from the gala filtered back into his ears, the normalcy of the world around him clashing violently with the chaos inside him. He didn't know what to do with the knowledge, with the hurt. But for the first time, he realized that he didn't need his father's approval to be whole. He didn't need his father to make him feel worthy. He had always been enough. Outside, the night air hit him like a wave, and Lucas took a deep breath. He wasn't going to allow the past to define him any longer. He would move forward. And as for Cristiano? His words no longer mattered. The air was crisp, the soft hum of the gala still lingering in the distance as Lucas stood just outside the hotel, trying to piece together everything that had transpired that evening. His emotions were a whirlwind, anger, hurt, confusion, but underneath it all, there was something new, an unexpected shift. It was the first time he had truly felt seen, truly heard by the man who had abandoned him so many years ago. As he walked away from the hotel entrance, he didn't expect anything to change immediately. He didn't expect the years of hurt to vanish in an instant. But what he did feel, for the first time, was a flicker of possibility that, perhaps, they could both start again, even if the road ahead wasn't easy. It was a week after the gala when Lucas received a message from Cristiano. He had expected their conversation to be a one-off, a moment of catharsis, a brief exchange that might have been the end of it. But instead, Cristiano's message was different. It wasn't full of excuses or empty promises. It was simple, direct. "I know this doesn't make up for everything," the text read, "but I want to keep talking. I want to make things right, Lucas. I want you in my life, however you'll have me." It wasn't the apology Lucas had wanted at first, the grand gesture, the tears and explanations. But there was something in Cristiano's words, a sincerity that reached through the years of silence and pain. Lucas didn't respond right away. He wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But the message stayed with him. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. Over the next few months, the two began to reconnect, slowly but surely. They exchanged messages at first, nothing too heavy, casual questions about life, about what they had been doing. Cristiano would share snippets of his day, updates about his football career, his family. Lucas would respond with bits and pieces about his life, his dreams, his interests. They talked about their favorite books, movies, and, at times, even their mutual love for football. Each conversation, though small, brought them closer. They didn't dive into deep discussions about the past right away. Instead, they focused on the present, building a foundation that wasn't tied to the mistakes of the past. There were moments where the old wounds threatened to resurface, where Lucas would remember the years of abandonment, the hurtful silence. But he didn't let it consume him. He was learning to compartmentalize, to take things one step at a time. After several weeks of messaging, Cristiano suggested they meet up in person. It was something Lucas had thought about but hadn't yet been ready for. The thought of facing Cristiano again, this time not in the midst of the gala's chaos, but one-on-one, was intimidating. But, after some contemplation, Lucas agreed. They chose a quiet cafe in Lisbon, away from the prying eyes of paparazzi and fans. The table was small, tucked in the corner, offering them a private space to talk. When Cristiano arrived, Lucas noticed the man wasn't the same as he remembered from the gala. His posture was more slumped, his eyes less guarded, and there was an undeniable weariness in his face. The famous athlete, who once seemed invincible, now appeared vulnerable. "Hey," Cristiano greeted, his voice soft, not at all the confident tone Lucas had expected. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." Lucas gave a small nod but didn't immediately speak. He wasn't sure what to say, what words could possibly bridge the chasm between them. But as they sat across from each other, something strange happened. There was no tension, no heavy expectation. It was just two people, no longer father and son, not yet even close to that, but two people trying to figure out how to be in each other's lives after years of absence. "I know we don't have to talk about the past if you're not ready," Cristiano said, leaning forward, his gaze steady on Lucas. "But I want to be real with you. I want you to know I'm here. I'm trying. And I'll keep trying. I want to know you, Lucas. I want to know who you've become." Lucas studied him for a moment. His eyes softened, the initial defensiveness fading. It was still raw, but there was no denying that Cristiano was making an effort, something he had never done before. "I've been through a lot," Lucas said quietly, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "I don't know if I can just forget everything. I don't know if I can let go of all that hurt." Cristiano nodded, understanding. "I don't expect you to," he said. "I never have. I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know. I'll be here, however long it takes. I won't leave you again." There was silence between them for a moment. It was an uncomfortable silence, but it was real. They were acknowledging the distance between them, acknowledging the pain, and yet, something in the air had changed. The moment no longer felt like a final confrontation but rather the start of something undefined, something new. Over the course of the next few months, their relationship continued to grow, one small step at a time. They began to spend time together, not just texting but calling each other, making plans to meet up in person more regularly. The more they talked, the more they realized how much they had in common, not just in terms of their interests and passions, but also in their shared experiences of loneliness and isolation. Cristiano shared stories about his struggles with fame, how the pressure of living in the public eye had often left him feeling disconnected and distant from those who truly mattered. He spoke of how he had tried to protect Lucas by keeping him away from that world, though Lucas was still conflicted about that choice. As their relationship evolved, Lucas began to recognize something in Cristiano that he hadn't seen before, a man who, despite his fame and fortune, was deeply human, deeply flawed. And, for the first time, Lucas allowed himself to see his father not as the man who had abandoned him, but as someone who was capable of growth, capable of change. The healing process wasn't linear, and there were times when it felt like they were taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But the most important thing was that they were trying. And in that effort, in those moments of vulnerability, a bond began to form. By the time the year had passed since their first conversation at the gala, the relationship between Lucas and Cristiano had improved in ways neither of them had expected. They still had a long way to go, but the foundation was stronger than it had ever been. They had learned to communicate, to respect each other's boundaries, and most importantly, to appreciate each other's presence in their lives.